Hello and welcome everybody. My name is Veronica Santiago Liu. Thank you for attending this virtual event organized by Word Up Community Bookshop. Word Up is a bookshop and art space run by local residents of Washington Heights, many of whom are volunteers. We started as a 1-month-long pop-up shop in 2011, then stuck around due to overwhelming community support. This past June, we celebrated our 11th birthday. We can be found at 2113 Amsterdam Avenue at the corner of 165th Street, Uptown, NYC. We host events for all ages, sell used and new books in English and Spanish. And you can check wordupbooks.com to shop and see other virtual and outdoor events we have. Open Tuesdays to Fridays, 12 to 6, and Saturdays, 11 to 5. We also have a new alternate location called Recirculation at the corner of 160th and Riverside Drive. That space came about because a former Word Up collective member passed away from COVID and left us in charge of all of his books and records, which we've been recirculating to the community at pay what you can prices. We're also starting to host events there in person. And next Wednesday, September 28th, we will be hosting the Uptown launch of Angie Cruz's How Not to Drown in a Glass of Water. As all gathered here probably know, Angie, who is now a stalwart board member of Word Up, is a force and the founder of Aster's Journal. She will share a few words now and introduce the editors of the issue and moderators of this event. Angie?
Hi, everyone. I'm so excited to be here. Today is not only the launch of our new issue, Mothers Unearthed, it's also the autumn's equinox, a good day to reflect and to really just be here now in community. So thinking about also what we're grateful for, I want to thank all of you who are contributing your work to this issue and for being part of the Asterix Familia, and especially grateful for Emily Raboteau, my dear friend and brilliant novelist and nonfiction writer, and Tanya Shirazi, who's been working closely with Asterix for many years and is now senior editor at Asterix Journal and is a PhD candidate at University of Nevada, finishing her first novel. I want to thank Word Up Books for hosting this event. And I just want to say I celebrate you. I celebrate us. We did it. The issue looks beautiful. And without further ado, I will pass the mic to Emily Raboteau.
Thanks, Angie. Thanks, Veronica. Special thanks to all the contributors of this issue. Just a little bit of history. I was invited by the Kianny N Review to guest edit like a folio, a part of their journal. And they wanted it to be climate themed, which is something I've been writing about the climate crisis for a few years now, often from the perspective of motherhood, because it's from that lens that I feel urgently compelled out of concern for my children's future to write about it. So I invited a bunch of women writers that I really admire, to some of whom are writing explicitly about the climate crisis, some of whom not necessarily so, but most of whom were mothers. And I asked, would you have something to say? And there were so many women who responded with beautiful pieces that we couldn't fit them all in that journal. And it was horrible to have to tell some of the women writers, sorry, we don't have room for this piece that I think is brilliant. And I complained of this problem to Angie, my dear friend, and she said, well, we'll just take all the other ones that you love and we'll make another issue of Asterix. So I mentioned that just to say this is kind of a sister issue to another issue called Angry Mamas of the Kianny N Review. This is sort of Angry Mamas 2.0. But the solicitation I gave to all of the women who are here tonight and the ones who aren't here tonight in this issue, which we called Mothers Unearthed, were invited by me to reflect on, in whatever genre they chose, about the climate crisis from the lens of motherhood. And in particular, I invited people to use anger as a driving emotion. And I'll let the women talk more about how they used that invitation to write what they did. So my first question for the women, and we'll just go through the contributors here, is why did you choose to respond to my solicitation to write from the perspective of an angry mama about climate change in the way that you did? We'll start with Stacy. Stacy, after you tell us why you wrote what you did, I would love it if we could hear a little, just a taste of what you wrote for this issue.
Sure. Well, thank you, Emily, and thank you to this incredible all-women team who put this together and put tonight together. So, my name is Stacy. I live here in Harlem, but in 2005, I lived in Houston, and I lived there. And at the time, I didn't have children. I was a writer in residence in different schools. And so, but basically none of my residency started until like later in September. So when everything happened with Katrina, I was at home. So I spent a lot of time, I remember those first days after the storm and the levees breaking, just sitting just in front of CNN and just, heart just, pouring out and just not understanding what I was seeing, because one thing was I used to work in the Clinton administration. I worked in the Clinton administration all through college and after college, and it was kind of like a best of times, worst of times thing. But what I knew was, in the face of this kind of catastrophe, the people that I worked with would not have sat back, and they wouldn't have pointed fingers and not find ways not to help in a way that was meaningful. And I just didn't understand, how everything could kind of go as it did. And the other thing I'd like to add is, it was also a time, like up until that point, I was feeling my most hopeless politically. It was like year 5 of the George W. Bush administration. I was just seeing how they would manufacture big lies, and they just kept moving forward with their big lies, and it made me want to just really honestly put my head in the sand. And I'm not really a head in the sand kind of person, but I was just feeling that, coming into Katrina. And it was during this time that I realized you can't, it was radicalization. You can't turn away from problems in our society. You can't be apolitical, because you're going to be found. There's no safe place. And it kind of took going through, witnessing what I witnessed to kind of bring that consciousness to the fore. So what I end up doing is, and I write about this in the piece, is that I do a fair amount of volunteering in Houston, and I have an old mentor suggest to me, go talk to people. You really need to get stories down. And at that time, we're talking days, early September, and I was thinking, people need like immediate needs met. Like, I didn't want to feel like a vulture. Like, I wasn't a journalist. Like, I was a writer, and I didn't have that journalistic background. But then, I just went and did it. And so the reason why I shared this when Emily asked was because now I've been working on a bigger project where I'm incorporating some of the oral histories, incorporating my experience. There's lessons I want to share for my son. I feel like this was such an important time for our country, and important time for me. Like, I culled a lot of lessons, and I'll just say that I'm sorry. Like, I'm going on. I don't know if I'm talking too much. Let's keep going.
You're not talking too.
Okay. So I'll just say, first I'll say a bit about the title, and then I'm going to read just a portion of it real quick. The title of this piece is Prime Coats, and it comes from some of my first interviews were outside the George R. Brown Convention Center in Houston, and I was so proud of Houston as a whole, because from the mayor down, there was attitude like, we are going to welcome people, we're going to take care of people, we're going to do the best we can. I'm not saying it was all perfection, but that really was the ethos. And so the George R. Brown Convention Center was transformed into a shelter, and I was talking to people who were outside, and there was one young man I talked to named Prentice, and it's and part of his interview is in the story, and there's just the point where he's just saying, everything that's happened, like the hurricane is a prime coat, and the real pain is Black displacement. And the way that he just kind of tells it is always just stuck with me, right? And so Prime Coats is the name of this essay. What I want to share with you, though, is a piece from Dr. Ben de Boisblanc's interview. He was the medical director at Charity Hospital and was there all 7 days until they finally were able to get everybody out. It was a very scary time for them because it was like, one thing he talks about later in the interview is that action is very important. Like if you're sitting back, waiting for someone to rescue you, that hopelessness sets in, that the more that you can be active in trying to solve your own problems, then it's just very empowering, right? And they find ways to get people out until finally the cavalry, as in FEMA, shows up, but it takes 7 days. So the piece I'm going to share is basically the day after Katrina hits, and let me just read it to you 1 second. I remember getting around to bed 11 to check on a patient, initials HR. HR, this 23-year-old kid, he had Goodpasture syndrome. Goodpasture syndrome is a disease that causes you to have hemorrhaging in your lungs and kidney failure. He was sent to us maybe 2 or 3 days before the hurricane from a small hospital in Independence. They sent him to us because we're an academic medical center. HR was on a ventilator, a breathing machine with a tube down his throat, on a very high oxygen concentration because of his lung failure. His respiratory failure was very severe. He was also getting dialysis. There was a woman, CW, who was a respiratory therapist helping HR. I said, CW, are you okay? Yeah, fine. I left, came back about 20 minutes later. Are you okay? Are you okay? Yeah. I insisted. Why don't you let me give you a break? She refused. No, I'm fine. All right, came back an hour later, got up to HR's room, and I said, CW, you're still here. Why don't you take a break? Let me give you a break. No, I'm okay. It kind of gave me a little chill. I realized, whoa, CW wasn't going to let anyone mess with HR. That was her patient. I didn't realize it at the time, but I really think that it has something to do with the fact that CW was a single mom. Her only son, her everything, C, had died the year before. Sudden cardiac death during football practice. Very sad. She was devastated by that. It took a long time before she could come back to work. This was a chance for her to feel like a mother again, a protector. No one, me included, was going to get in the way of that. I think it was people taking ownership for individual patients was why we did as well as we did. Thank you.
Thank you for sharing that, Stacy. I really like the idea of you collecting those testimonies also as lessons for your own son, as you framed it, lessons for your child. We're going to hear from Claire next. Maybe Claire, you could tell us where you're zooming in from and answer the same question, why you wrote what you did, and let us hear a little bit of it in your voice.
Sure. Stacy, that was so moving. Thank you so much. And I'm so thrilled to be in conversation with all of you, like really brilliant writers and thinkers and mothers. So I'm a writer from Colorado. That's where I'm zooming from today. And I was so thrilled to be invited to write about my rage because it is so close to my heart, this like dark ball of climate rage. And I feel like so often women are, especially mothers, are sort of asked not to express that particular emotion. Anger is not something it's acceptable for us to sort of carry or make space for. So I approached the topic, I was thinking a lot at the time about my children who are 17 and 20, and we spend a lot of time as a family in the wilderness. We still do. Well, I still do. They do their own thing. But when they were young, we took them into the wilderness a lot. And many of the spaces that we took them burned in the 2020 fires, just trail after trail after trail, these spaces that my children really loved. And they already had a lot of climate despair, I would say. And writing the essay really taught me how much of my rage was also tied to grief and how much loss, this cascading series of losses, was affecting multi-generations, and how it was sort of an exploration of how to hold on to hope when the climate crisis, it's always here and it's always present, but when it's actually like in your backyard, you can see the fire. So yeah, I'll read a small section of the essay, and here we are. We took our kids into the wilderness as often as we could while they were growing up, hiking over high mountain passes, pitching tents above tree lines while coyotes yipped in the distance, cooking lean dinners on tiny stoves while constellations burned bright above us. We wanted to map wilderness onto their hearts, the effortless glide of a beaver in the pool behind its lodge, the butterscotch scent of ponderosa pines, the bitter roaring wind that blows across the tundra and into your ears, swirling through and softening a jumpy modern mind. We taught them to stay on the trail, to leave no trace. In the face of climate catastrophe, we wanted them to love the world enough to work to save it, but we also wanted them to feel, as much as possible, the joy of being alive within it. They believed us when we told them that an official wilderness designation meant the land would be there for them far into the future, that it might be altered by climate change, but it would be intact, more or less untouched. In our defense, until these past years of mega fires, we believed it too. Thank you.
Thank you, Claire. I really love that line. We wanted to map wilderness onto their hearts. I especially, and I share that sentiment, even though I live in New York City with my kids, but hearing you say it reminds me of that, I don't know, that ambition and that imperative, actually. So thank you. Next in our circle is Carolyn. Carolyn, let's hear from you about why you wrote as you did and hear a little bit of your piece.
Thank you. Thanks, Emily. Thanks, Angie. Thanks, Tanya, for inviting us all to this 2.0 climate change, Mothers on Fire. I know that's not what it's called, but as I was writing, I was thinking about Mothers on Fire because I was thinking about all of the things that have been mentioned so far. And I've been so inspired hearing, what you've said, Stacy, and what you've said, Claire. Hopelessness, rage, grief, all somehow leading to hope. I was inspired by something that has been kind of eating at me for a long, long time. When my kids were little, they're now 20 and 24. When they were little, my mother-in-law used to babysit for them when my husband and I were at work. And my in-laws lived in a housing project. And I was really fascinated with the way people took care of their homes. They took care of the outside and the inside, and yet there was no real initiative from the housing authority for people to recycle. There were no recycling bins. There were no encouraging words. It was as if that existed for the rest of the world, and that kind of stuck in my mind all the time because I know that my family did think about that sort of thing, and it made me angry. But what I often turn to in moments of hopelessness and rage and grief is humor. So I actually wrote a response to this because I am a school teacher and a student, and I always have to write my responses. So to the question, why did I choose to write from the perspective of an angry mama about climate change or a mama on fire? 1, people often listen to angry mamas. 2, people love to laugh, especially when it's serious things that are being talked about, like our dying earth and how we're destroying it day by day, yet there is still some room for hope. 3, humor lends humanity to a dire situation. 4, but that doesn't mean that angry mamas should stop being angry. It means that we too would like to laugh more. 5, we'd like to laugh at glaciers that are still frozen, litter that doesn't have to exist, lights that go out, and stars that are allowed to shine down upon us in peace. 6, angry mamas ultimately want peace. And 7, angry mamas want bubble baths, glasses of wine and or seltzer if you don't drink, sweets, savories, adorably quiet families, and above all, peace. So I am going to just read a little bit from my story, The Recycling at Isaiah Gardens, which is a fictionalized housing project. Do not, I repeat, throw trash in the cans in front of building number 3. Look at your hands. If you see you've got diapers in them, or orange peels, pizza crust, bobby pins, cigarettes, hair, well, that goes in your floors, down your floor's trash chute. The one in your hallway marked deposit trash here, department NYC DSPW. The cans in front of building number 3 are for paper and cans and bottles, nothing else, especially not paperwork. Do not throw your paperwork into those bins. Keep your paperwork with you at all times, because it could be that you think the authorities are coming to check the building out when in reality, they're coming to check you out. Be aware, the New York City Department of Sanitation and Planetary Welfare don't play no games. Thank you.
Thank you for making us laugh, Carolyn. I love your piece so much. It's a great story. And yes, we do want peace. We really do. Next in our circle is Vanessa. Vanessa, let us know where you're zooming in from, why you wrote what you did, and let's hear a little bit of it.
Hello, my name is Vanessa Martir. I am calling in from Orange County, upstate New York, about 75 minutes outside of the city. I finally left New York City last February. I live in the woods now on 6.5 acres. It is a completely different way of life. But it's part of the reason why I answered the call. Angie Cruz actually tagged me on the call on Twitter. And I think what struck me was I've been writing so much about my mother's garden. I grew up in Bushwick, Brooklyn, but not the Bushwick, Brooklyn of today that everybody wants to live in. I grew up in Bushwick when it was a pile of rubble. The South Bronx is infamous for, between 1965 and 1980, there were over 1 million fires in New York City. And it's referred to as the fire wars. It's, if you've ever watched The Get Down, they kind of chronicle that era. Well, Bushwick is just as devastated. Like, there were these trash strewn lots for blocks. Like, there was one of these lots like right next door. And in this war zone, my mother created this garden oasis. And we had a plum tree. And it was in that plum tree that I became a writer. So it's something that I've really been obsessed with and I've been writing about for a long time. And so getting this call and really thinking about all these ideas, I see that garden oasis as the root. It's where I became enamored with nature. You wouldn't know that. People don't, like in Bushwick at that time, but yeah, I spent so much time in that garden. And during the shutdown, I've been in love with nature since. Like, I lived in Inwood. I used to take my daughter to Inwood Hill Park. Inwood Hill Park is the only natural forest on Manhattan Island. And when I moved in with my wife, well, she's not my wife, before we got married, I was like, we need to be near Inwood Hill Park or near a park that's a natural forest. So we moved to Riverdale, where I had Van Cortlandt right there, or I could cross the bridge and go to Inwood. And during the shutdown, I created this garden on our deck because I needed something to hold on to hope. And it was while I was doing it that I was like, wow, I'm doing what my mother did. And it was just so instinctual, and I recruited my wife and my daughter, and neither one of them is really into or they weren't, at least now they are, because I have converted them. So all these ideas about, and also now that I moved and we were able to buy land, like thinking about future generations, like one of the things that I really am hopeful for and that I'm really honored to do is to leave this land to my daughter and to future generations. And last year when the hurricane hit, and we had flooding, like so much happened. And it was, I think, the first time that I was really like, wait, we could lose this. We live at the foot of a mountain. And just seeing the reports of like mudslides and everything that was happening. And I just really, once I got the call, I was able to put all these ideas down and really start thinking about putting this into a piece. And the result of that is this essay that I wrote. So I will read an excerpt of it. At home, wherever I've traveled or moved to, I've searched out woods, the redwood forests of Berkeley and Oakland, a tree-lined trail in Decatur, Georgia, the deep woods of Portland, Oregon. At home in New York City, it was the old growth forest of Inwood Hill Park that saved me when my brother Juan Carlos died in 2013. I walked paths created centuries ago by the Lenape, some so steep that you have to grapple up. I discovered their ancient healing circles that are now being maintained by Taínos. I went into the forest one day, a mantra in my head. I need you to hold me. I need you to hold me. My face was streaked with tears. Snot dripped out of my nose. It started in front of me. Blue jays chirping so loud, I had to stop. Sparrows to my right, red cardinals to my left, titmice and nuthatches behind me. The birds carried my into their throats. I was being held in birdsong. Thank you.
Thank you, Vanessa. Gracias. Is there anything like more perfect? And beauty? I don't think so. I don't know if I froze there, but I love your piece, and I'm too learning lessons about healing from gardening. Okay, so next in our circle is Emily, my name sister. In Portuguese, we call you Nomida. We share a name. Emily, why did you write what you wrote when you got this call? And will you share a little bit of it with us?
Thank you so much, Emily. It's funny because part of the reason that I felt moved to respond to the call is because I feel so moved by your climate writing. Like that call could happen and I would not take it up. But when you make that call, I'm like, yes, that is a conversation that I want to be part of. And partly it's a conversation I want to be part of because I realize that so much of the rage that I feel as a mother and as a woman and as a human being is incoherent. Like it's just this deep rage about kind of everything about the way our society is happening right now. But when I sat down and started writing it, I realized that the kind of focus of a lot of that rage that has to do with climate change and also about the pandemic is about how people doubt that it's actually happening. People who doubt science, who doubt the work of their own eyes, who doubt the storms that destroy towns and whole parts of the world. And so that's what I really wrote about in my essay, which is called Spaceship. Also, I am calling in from Oberlin, Ohio, which is really close to Lake Erie. I teach at Oberlin College, so that's where I am. So the essay is called Spaceship because there is a spaceship in the essay, which is a kind of, one hopeful potential thing about the world. But a lot of the essay is about the social contract falling apart or people kind of refusing to sign it or whatever. And the part that I'm going to read you is just a paragraph that kind of details what life was like here in Oberlin for me as a full-time working mom, having At the time, a 7th grader and a 2nd grader who were home from school and on Zoom like this for an entire year. So that's the part I'll read you. 7th and 2nd graders bored out of their minds all day, finagling ways to play bootleg versions of Minecraft on their school computers and asking for snack after snack after snack. 10 snacks a day, 15. Increasing pickiness about snacks, diminishing willingness to accept fruits or nuts as snacks. Teaching full-time while managing this, while each kid has Zoom school at top volume in a different room. So sonically, you bounce all day from a 7th grade Zoom hellscape to a 2nd grade one. Sometimes you're in both at once. All that noise, their loud voices warping the sound from the laptop speakers. When you look over your younger son's shoulder, you see all the 7-year-olds wiggling in their boxes like some kind of deranged aquarium. It makes you seasick. The children like school but hate online school, complain about it, and bicker all day. You try patiently to refute their arguments while also working full-time, feeding them every meal and 100 snacks, keeping abreast of the filthy disaster your house has become with 4 people living in it ceaselessly and without respite for months on end. You do this for an entire school year in which they fail tests and, in the older child's case, whole classes, yet somehow manage to progress to their next grades. Thanks.
Thank you, Emily. That was such a hard time. Such a hard time for mothers in particular. All right, we're gonna hear next in our circle is Sujatha. I think that the distinction of zooming in from the farthest distance is already tomorrow where she is, yes?
It is, yes. Hi, everybody. It is now, yes, 9:30 on Friday morning where I am, in just coming out of winter. So we're really all over the place, but thank you for so much to Emily and Tanya and to Angie and Word Up Books, everyone. This is just amazing. And it's so great to see people's faces, to hear your words, to be here with you. I'm really excited from so far away, but that we can still all be together. It's, when I heard from Emily, one thing I had been sort of thinking about, I was talking to one of my cousins about how what we just, as mothers in this time, most of our time, we seem to be just putting out spot fires. It just feels like living through the pandemic, living through all these climate crises, living through a time of general social upheaval. It just feels like life is one spot fire after another. And that's, you move from one to the next, to the next, to the next. And that's pretty much occupies you. It's hard to go beyond that. And so when Emily asked me to contribute, I really saw it as an opportunity to step back from the spot fires and look at them a little bit in perspective, to think about what they all mean, to think about, how, just to sort of give more of a sort of frame in my head to everything that was happening. And it was funny because I started writing just, having myself sort of lived on different continents, experienced climate crises in a whole lot of different places. I began the essay just as a way of documenting them, thinking, okay, that time when we were in the Catskills during that hurricane and then this hurricane, and I started documenting them. And what's interesting is I continued that documentation all the way up to a week before the final essay was due, because we were having floods in Sydney, we were having massive storms. And it was a process of documentation for me. And then, one thing I really admire about Emily's climate writing is how she weaves in so many stories of other people, stories of friends, stories of people all over the world. And so that's what I wanted to do in my essay as well. I wanted to sort of bring in the stories of my family, my friends, all the people I knew who had lived through, especially in Australia, given the last 3 years of what's gone on here. Just to bring in all their stories as well. And so anyway, it's interesting because when the essay came out, I sent it out to my family, my extended family, and so many people wrote back to say how grim they thought it was and how depressed they felt from reading it. which I guess I didn't realize, this cataloging of all these disasters, it adds up to sort of like a pretty grim scenario, even if it's what we actually have lived through and we haven't quite realized it since, over the last 3-4 years. But I personally don't see it as something, I don't feel depressed, I don't feel grim, because I think to me, there's, I find a lot of sustenance in the collective, and particularly, as I write about in the piece, and being part of a climate justice family and activism has been really crucial and important to me in my life. And that's kind of where I see hope. So I want to just read a piece that also involves Zoom and children. So there's a kind of connection here between us. During the coronavirus pandemic, mass climate rallies switched to online Zoom rallies and digital actions. At an online protest of the Adani Mining Corporation's occupation of Wangananjagalingu lands, I see the schoolgirls who have gathered in an empty gym. I see the elderly matrons who have brought their neighbors to a community center to join in the protest. I see the geoscientists logging in from Godda, India, where Adani plans to transport the coal to a power station built on the lands of the Santhal people. I see Wangananjagalingu elder Adrian Buragaba speak of what his country is like, the life-giving Dungmabula Springs, teeming with waxy cabbage palms, brolgas, and emus. I see the other mamas. I recognize their distraction as they issue muted orders to someone off screen, a child's head occasionally popping into the frame. I know the look of determination, the fury we nurture as our weapon and our power.
Thank you so much, Sujatha. I really like what you said about finding sustenance in the collective. And the way you structured your essay, we feel that, I think. I don't think of your piece as being depressing either, but I'm so glad that you're a part of this issue. And last but not least is Kianny. Kianny, tell us where you're zooming in from and why you wrote what you did, and let us hear a little of it.
Hola, mujeres maravillosas. Wow. So many wonderful voices, powerful perspectives. Whoa. My name is Kianny Antigua, and I am in New Hampshire. Getting too cold too soon. Aside from that, I am so grateful. It is such an honor to share my anger and my fire with you. I am going to do something different. I am going to read first, and then I am sure that my answer is embedded in my short reading. And I quote myself. I must admit, I was incredibly selfish before I had my daughter. As too many other Dominican women and men, born and raised on the island, I didn't give a shit about the environment. Why? Nobody else did. The government didn't care. No one spoke about pollution or waste. The word contamination was only used to refer to drinking water or Haitians. Then Mia came. I quote her now. Humans litter. They hunt just because. Light pollution, air pollution. They destroy habitat for no reason at all. Global warming. They throw so much garbage in the ocean. Humans suck. More than my daughter, she is the mother, the voice of reasoning, who didn't wait for others to make a move first. She, as Mother Earth, is angry. And who wouldn't be? Why wouldn't they? Why wouldn't she? End of quote. These are the words of my 7-year-old child, who is the root, the core of this piece. the inspiration for anything good that may come out of me. The title of my short essay is She, Mia, Doesn't Want to Be Called a Human. However, I must now retitle that piece to They, Mia, Don't Want to Be Called a Human. Why? Because of my child. They deserve so much better than what I have done. This short essay, and it's funny because I'm in a church now. It's like a public confession, my path to redemption, if you wish, if you will. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kianny. Really moved by what you wrote. And I feel like especially grateful we got to end with Mia's voice, with their voice, because they're angry too. And you know, we have to listen to them, and we have to have the dialogue with them, and we have to do the work for them. And your piece really reminds us of that. Tanya Shirazi, who did the hard work of editing this, like I really curated it. I mean, I like brought people in, but Tanya's the one who did the labor of like the midwifery work of working with all these writers to really get it right, like to really get the issue right, to get the individual, you know, voices as strong as possible. And also, you know, to make the issue make sense as a whole. I'm so grateful to Tanya for the hard and often invisible labor of editing this. And we're going to turn it over to her now. She has some questions for the writers, but before she asks questions of them, I really want to hear her voice a little. So Tanya, like what are some, you know, maybe you could just talk as the editor of this about its meaning for you. Like you have a special perspective as somebody who worked really on an insider level with these writers to notice the connections between the pieces too. So like, what did you learn from this process, and what do you see are the common threads? Maybe you could answer that before asking more questions of our writers.
Sounds good. Thank you so much for sharing, everyone. I have learned so much from this. Thank you to
Hold on, Tanya, we're missing your sound. Let's fix the problem technically before you go on.
And like the heaviness, but also like the joy that came from the pieces. And I think for me, what I saw a lot is, I think it's really like a perfect title to call it like Mothers Unearthed, because it felt like such an excavation of emotion, an excavation of all that rage, of all that love, like all that grief that we have because we have loved something that we lost. And I think the qualifying factors of naming the things that we've lost, two different types of catastrophes, whether they be personal or grand, they were all informed in one way or another. And I thought it was just so beautiful the way that they all came together to tell this story that was both, it was like communal. I don't know how else, but it was like the mothers, like plural, like everyone, Mother Earth, the mothers, everyone is protecting, everyone knows what's at stake, and those are the children. So I feel like for me, it really magnified the urgency of the small and large catastrophes that are always happening around us. And I think every single piece touched so much on the change that happens when we have someone to fear outside of our own mortality in some ways. I think it also really framed the direness and the shortness of our ability to not, like, we don't have the luxury to not look. I feel like everyone was like demanding to be, not only to be heard, but also to like maintain the gaze. And we all did it in different, every single piece did it in a different way, whether it be through humor, whether it be through the testimonies of other people, whether it be the voices of the children, they all really resonated that way with me. And I was just so moved. Like some of the, like I cried, especially listening to them. I think there's something so, you can't escape when you're driving in a car for 4 hours straight and just listening to all of these, you know, narratives and stories come together to really like be a whole work. And I thought that was like very powerful. So I'm very, very grateful to be able to work with you all. Yeah, I'm gonna ask some questions. I think I want to start off with, let's see, let me do a question around the children. So Sujatha's climate change, there's a quote that says, sometimes it takes a child to teach us how to notice. So the works in Mothers Unearthed center children's voices. We have children scolding us adults for our selfishness, begging us not to buy any more clothes because we have enough, asking if the future will be bad and smoking, demanding change in nationwide protests. So how has motherhood shaped/changed the way you notice, you witness, and how has it changed your writing?
And this question is for anyone?
Yeah, anyone, free for all.
Because let me tell you, I mean, there was a Kianny before Mia, and there is this Kianny now relearning how to be a human being. Oh God, I didn't know anything about anything. My daughter, my child, they carry so much light. The things that they're learning at school, the things, I mean, it's a contribution of everything. We're living in a different place. Like Vanessa, I am in the middle of the boonies, you know, that's how she calls it. I'm in the boonies. And it's different. They can speak, they can ask questions. I didn't have that for all the reasons you can think right now. And so it's a very special moment in history. And we are here just like witnessing their development, their growth, their brilliance, their questions. And again, we owe them. We mess it up for them. We owe them. We have to be humble and listen. And as you say, Tanya, I mean, how can you unseen what you have seen? Like, no, that would be impossible y muy cobarde. Nah.
I think for me, like I knew I wanted to parent differently, you know. My mother is, you know, una mujer with a hard fist, you know, she still is. She's gangster, she is. And I wanted to be different, you know, I wanted to be, you know, I wanted my daughter to be able to talk to me. I wanted to be able to say, I'm sorry. And for her to say, I'm sorry, like communication. And my daughter made me realize that I had to start with me, right? I couldn't parent her differently if I didn't do a lot of healing work. And so I think with her, I became the mother I wanted to be, you know, and the woman I want to be and the writer I want to be, you know, like I can look at myself in the mirror and be like, oh shit, I'm proud. And that wasn't always the case, you know, and now she's in college. You know, I have a college student. She got a full scholarship to go. She did that. She's at Hunter on a Macaulay Honors College merit scholarship. Yeah. So seeing her just thrive and shine, and she calls me every single day. You know, she FaceTimes me. And if I don't answer, she's like, Ma, what are you doing? What else do you have to do other than be my mother? You know? So like it really made me realize what's important. And that's one of the reasons, you know, we've been hearing about climate change for so long, but I think we have to have, some of us have to have it come close to home for us to really like feel the urgency of it. And for me, the urgency was having my kid and like seeing, you know, the world that we're leaving to them. Yeah.
I feel, you know, if I can just jump in, I have the privilege of having my mother in the audience here, listening to all of us. And I have to say that when I became a mother, everything changed for me as a writer. But I wanted to have all of the great things that my mother taught me, I wanted to pass on to my kids. And I went through a period of feeling I just can't do it. I just can't do the things that my mother did for me. I'll never be up to doing that. And of course, in time, I realized that I was, you know, passing on these lessons to my kids that I had gotten, you know, whether I believed I could do it or not. And Vanessa, I have to say, I was so moved by your story of gardening because I was just talking today. I gave a reading last night at Philadelphia, and I came home this morning, and the taxi driver was talking to me about gardening and about his fear of insects. And when I was a child, I was pathologically afraid of insects. And my mother used to garden all the time as a child. And I just remember thinking, there's no way I'm not going to touch those bugs. I'm not going to touch worms. I don't want mosquitoes. I don't want anything to come near me. And one of the things that, you know, my mother taught me a love of the earth. And, you know, my children have, they have an interest in gardening when they garden with grandma, not so much with me, but I now appreciate the earth so much more as a mother. That's a gift that my mother gave to me. And I'm not a great gardener, but I try, and I'm very, very interested in learning. And I hope some osmosis.
Angie, your phone. I think you're on two things.
The Martians. I always call those Martians when they make those sounds. At any rate, that's all I wanted to say, is that you know, I feel like I inherited the gift of the garden, still working on it though. Yeah, I feel really privileged, and that of course has brought concerns of climate change much closer to home for me.
Oh, I'm still learning too. I keep killing things. So, but I've actually, yes, but I've also, some of them have thrived. So I'm still learning. So, yeah.
It's great to have the shout out to a mother in Mothers Unearthed launch. I think that's so sweet and great, which is actually a good segue to another question that I had, actually inspired from that line, Carolyn, that you just referenced from Vanessa's essay that reads, "My mother built a garden in that war zone. I carried it with me ever since."
We can't hear you.
Tanya, we couldn't hear your question. Your audio blinked out.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. The question was, how are we still building gardens in war zones? Whether it be in our writing or for our children.
Well, one of the things I don't talk about in the essay is that my mother and I are not speaking. And we've had a very contentious relationship. And it's interesting because it's through gardening that I've been able to forgive her for a lot. And in writing also, because as I write and I really sit with what her life has been like, I understand what the garden was for her. Like, it was how my mother survived, right? And like planting the garden on our land this year. And, you know, my daughter was in the city. She started living in the city in the summer because she started working full time, and like empty nest syndrome and all of that. Like, it's in so many ways full circle, but in some ways it's not, because my mother's not in my life. But it's just helped me understand her and her coping mechanisms in ways that I didn't you know. I didn't have that before. And it's helped me heal that wound in many ways. Yeah.
I think that's really, oh, sorry, Tanya, were you trying to? I think that's really beautiful, Vanessa, and I just, you know, could really, that came through so strongly in your essay, and just in general, I mean, in other people's essays as well, talking about gardens. And you know, it's funny because in mine, I talk about a couple of gardens, my own garden and my auntie's garden that disappeared with the floods. And to me, I find this sort of, in a metaphorical sense, building gardens through my writing. And I think I'm thinking about a piece by Omar Al-Akkad, the writer, in Orion magazine, where he said that as, you know, we start to lose so many of these very special places, one place that, you know, we can keep them is in our writing, how we remember them, how they were. And that's how I think of my writing very often, is trying to really memorialize and think about places that I love and I have loved, and just trying to remember them. So.
I'd like to jump in and just say that something that was that's really struck me is from your piece, Sujatha. Hold on one second, Anthony. I'm on the Zoom. Why, you gonna say hi to all the ladies? Okay, but we'll talk in a minute. Okay. Sorry about that. So part of, like, say that my piece was like this kind of consciousness raising in myself of, like, you know, you can't turn away, right? But what I really appreciated in your piece was kind of, you know, there's the will to get our families a safety, right? Like, as things get worse, we need to, where are we going to get our families so they're safe? And kind of the consciousness of, like, it can't just be our own families, right? We have to, everyone, if not everyone's safe, and none of us are safe, you know? And I just wanted to thank you for that, because I think that's, because I have in my, like, I sit here and fantasize, like, we got to move to the Catskills. We need water on our land. We got to figure this out, you know, or move back to Michigan. We'll have our own Great Lakes, you know, like, you know, but it's like, no, it has to be everybody or it's not going to work. So thank you.
I think,
Go ahead, please.
I guess I feel like for me, it's a sense that we're all building gardens as like a hedge, not a hedge, but like against capitalism, under capitalism, right? That's like really driving the climate crisis. And there is a sense that we have to provide like basic things, we have to be our own food justice, because the world doesn't care about food justice, and we have to be our own gardeners. And I think that's both beautiful and troubling and complicated. And I just am so happy to be here in this event, to feel accompanied on that journey. We raised our kids when they were young. We had a farm, a vegetable and flower farm, that we lost at the end of the recession and moved to town, which was a really hard thing for the family to adjust to. But so I think a lot about food and growing things and cultivating life and why that matters. And it's so tied to caring for the earth and caring for children and caring for everything, really.
So because we care, there's a lot of rage of what we're losing. Emily quotes rage all the time from your piece. I'm wondering, how did you reckon with the rage and like strike balance with producing having the endurance to write these pieces and to write from that space?
I mean, I guess, as a Jewish woman, I have very often been accused of being like too loud, too opinionated, you know, and I really embrace that characterization. I think that when something's wrong in the world, you've got to yell about it. You gotta yell until people listen, and I notice they're not listening yet in a lot of places, so maybe we all just need to make our voices even louder. So for me, there was, anyway, in writing this essay, like there was a sense that like nobody could stop me from being angry about everything from extractivist capitalism to, the person who doesn't want to wear a mask because they don't care that somebody else near them is immune compromised. Do you know what I mean? And I was like, as long, while I'm at it, here are all the things. And that, I mean, it was kind of exhausting, but I have to say that it also felt really great. And it felt great to feel like I could put it in a form where, first of all, I could then shape it into, a relatively coherent argument, but also where somebody else might listen and where it might be in conversation with somebody else's rage so that we can understand where each other are coming from and make both voices or all the voices louder together. That was very healing in a way I hadn't really expected.
I really relate to what you're saying, Emily. I really appreciate everything. I feel as a writer, I've always been drawn to characters who haven't felt heard and haven't felt seen. That they, and I think, of course, about all the times in my life that I haven't felt heard or seen. And even as a child, I knew that writing was the way that I would be noticed, for good or bad. I'd be noticed through my writing. And I think that, the older I get, I just feel like all of these characters are kind of coming out of the woodwork who are not heard or seen, and who haven't been heard or seen. And I feel it's my responsibility to respond to them. When we got this assignment, I really felt happy because it was almost as if I had been given permission to write about these people in the housing project and their relationship to recycling and to climate change. Because I don't think the mainstream world really cares, in fact, I know they don't care. So it just felt natural to kind of move into that territory. So, I just bring this up because there's always this little nagging in me of that, who is not being, whose voice is just not being heard. And it's what I'm most attracted to as a writer.
I think rage has always been a catalyst for me to speak up. Like even my mother says, "Tu nunca, you never know how to shut up." She'd be like, do something. And I'd be like, "But why?" Because I said so, but that doesn't mean, doesn't answer the question why, And I always had a big mouth. So being a writer went hand in hand because I could actually, and I think I used to be scared of my rage, and now I'm intrigued by it because I'm look at what are the things that make me angry and what can I do about it? Because if it makes me angry, there's something there to be mined, to be excavated. So it makes me curious. Yeah. So yeah, I don't turn away from my rage. Well, sometimes I have to because we gotta live in the world. But putting it on the page is something that really helps me process it and dig into it and yeah.
So Vanessa, you just became this big, huge eureka for me. Like, oh, that's why, because I have a big mouth, and oh, that's why writing works. Okay, now everything makes sense to me. Thank you so much.
Oh, that's great.
So connecting a little bit, or still revisiting the topic of rage, as you have become more enraged as mothers about climate change, how has your approach to parenting changed?
I think if anything, it was my daughter who, she was learning these steps. She was chiquitita, she was little. And, it was her and I was a single parent for 10 years, right? And she Like I'd be brushing my teeth and she would turn off the water and, you know, talk to me about like water conservation. And, you know, like if I accidentally put something in the trash that was supposed to be recycled, she would grab the bottle and walk over to me and like wag it in front of me like, Ma, you know? So it made me, she's the one that actually made me more, you know, aware of these things, you know? And so now we do it to each other. Yeah.
I kind of feel like this generation is talking about and questioning the world and thinking about things in a way that I feel our generation didn't do as much. I mean, my kids come home from school with questions about capitalism and they want to talk about, you know, what's happening on the planet, and they want to talk about all of this stuff. And I mean, I don't remember that they're 11 and 13 years old. I don't remember. I mean, and then my son, for instance, had an activity at school where he had to come up with an app, and the app he came up with was to help people in flood zones. I was just like, wow, you know, that's crazy that an 11-year-old has to think about flood zones when they're doing an activity for coming up with an app. But it feels like that's just where they're at. They are dealing with all these crises in a way that were there when we were growing up, but not to the same extent. Yeah, so I feel like, I mean, I like it. I'm glad. It's to me, it's really good because I feel glad to be able to have these conversations with them, that they're engaged, that they're asking these kind of questions, and hope that they will continue.
I'll add that it's kind of funny now. My son's 12, and he's very intense at times, right? And so when he gets onto a new thing, he's very intense about it. And so it was like 2 days ago. You know, my mother-in-law has a place in Florida, and all of a sudden he comes into the dining room like, "Well, we have to say Florida." And I'm like, "Okay, yes, we do. We have to say Florida." But he kind of has this list of things that he needs us to do now. Like, we need to get solar panels. And me and my husband were like, whoa. Like, well, yes, we love this idea, but, you know, it's very expensive, and we don't know if we could really do it here. Maybe in Florida we could do it, you know, and realizing that on one hand it's that frustration of like, well, no, we don't have that kind of money just to lay down right now to like get solar panels, but also that kind of like how you like slow down people's roll, like, well, no, we can't do this yet. And, you know, realizing that managing, like, you know, his expectations about what can be done, but not trying to, it made me think about, like, you don't want to get caught in that trap of like, well, we can't do that yet. We can't, you know, like, how can we talk about ways that we could get to that? Could we budget for that? What can we do? And I guess this is something that he makes me think about a lot. I think part of our trouble, I see this myself, I see this with people, is that, well, no, this is like a different story, but like, I'll leave it at that because we're coming to the end. But thank you.
I have to add though that for me, listening has become the most important tool that I probably never used before. But not only to my child, but my students as well. Having all their background and their perspectives and their ways of seeing the world has been such an enlightenment. There's so many ways that in so many ways we connect, and in so many ways we're different, and in so many ways it's so enriching that, I love to bring my child to any talk, any conference, it's just, it's mind-blowing. Honestly, I am very grateful to be witness to, you know, whatever is happening. I have hope. I do. I am angry because I didn't do anything, but I also have a lot of hope.
I think also, Kianny, like in addition to that listening, which I think you're so right about, I also realize that, you know, it's pretty dire for our planet right now. And we should be direct with people. Like when a child asks a question, I feel you should answer it. And maybe 10 years ago, or maybe when my first son was like a little toddler, I would have been like, well, maybe he's not old enough to understand that yet. But actually, if somebody is old enough to ask the question, they're old enough to hear the answer. So that might be a way that my parenting has changed as time has gone on.
Yes.
I think it's been interesting, Vanessa. I don't know if you've noticed this, but my oldest is also in college. And my daughter has also recently started using they, them pronouns. So they are studying ecology and sustainability. And so my parenting, I think, would have been in flux anyway, like how to parent a new adult who is in their own way in the world. But the way it interacts with climate has really been listening to their questions and the knowledge that they're gaining, that they're bringing home, that I don't have, which are new questions for me. So I'm no longer like the giver of the climate information in the family. I'm sort of like the receiver, and I have to adapt to being that sort of mothering role and supporting them in that way. I also think it's such a source of joy for my own child and for this generation that they get to become, it's hopeful and joyful that they get to become more themselves all the time, and that they feel free to express those things is, like, to me, such a source of hope.
I don't think being flexible was an adjective added to parenthood, to moms and dads before this generation. It was either that or that or that. At least yes or yeah. I think that's another thing, listening and also being flexible and understand we don't have the answers, because we don't have the answers. This is something that we will have to work together in community, como una tribu. We have to understand that.
Yeah, because growing up, I didn't get to ask questions. It was like, I do what you asking me about? What do I eat? Right? Like, get out of here. Right? There's no, whereas, and listening and being able to say, you know what, I don't know the answer to that. Like letting her see my humanity and my, like, you know what, I want to find out. I'm curious. Let's look at it together, so that's different. And I'm not worried about this generation. Like, I'm not. I think they're like 20 times better than us. I think they're going to save us, I have so much faith and so much hope. And hearing your stories about your children and just proves that for me. Yeah, absolutely.
Listening, witnessing, it's all alive and well on the page. Like, all of you have honored those younger voices so much and have like reframed the way that even you're operating. So it's so like inspirational to see it, alive in this conversation and in the work. Thank you everyone for sharing. I actually want to close this conversation with a quote from Sujatha's Climate Refuge. It's actually the last line, one of the last lines, and it says, "Along the squares of face and groups on Zoom, I see the now familiar chat box filled with messages of solidarity. Refuge may look like this, apart but connected on this planet." And I thought it was a lovely way for us to close and really give space and honor the work that we're doing and the solidarity that we bring to this. So thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks.
Thank you so much.